pain, suffering.
For some people, Star Wars made prequels a dirty word.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
But with a few tweaks, they could have actually made the original trilogy even better than it was. And, believe it or not, it has nothing to do with Jar Jar Binks. With 16 years separating the end of the original trilogy and the start of the Star Wars prequels, one could argue that no movie could have lived up to the lofty expectations of the legions of fans that had been anticipating more entries into their favorite trilogy. Fan reaction was so harsh that George Lucas sold his prized creation to fund his other passion, education. It didn't have to be that way, and we're going to argue that a few small changes could have made all the difference. The first thing that we have to admit to ourselves as Star Wars fans is that we can tend to be a bit too precious with our beloved franchise. Wait, stop, hold your tomatoes. All the way back in 1977, George Lucas's tribute to the science fiction serials, westerns, and samurai movies of his youth was a long shot for sure. Science fiction was either subjected to the B-movie drive-in fare, or it was the dry, contemplative adult sci-fi like 2001: A Space Odyssey and the Russian classic Solaris. Lucas wanted to bring the action and adventure of serials like Flash Gordon back to the big screen and set about creating a rich world that would eventually see a character with a 3-second crowd shot at a bar get an entire backstory. That ability to fill in the gaps of the implied wider galaxy in Star Wars helped give the series life outside just a trilogy of films. With all of that hype and excitement, we as fans can start to lose track of Star Wars B-movie origins and begin to treat it like loftier entries like 2001. When it gets right down to it, Star Wars was always meant to be fun, and the original trilogy had a lot of things we overlooked because lightsabers and dogfights in space and Darth Vader is awesome. For the most part, that could be applied to the prequels, which, for people who had grown up on the original trilogy, never quite lived up to their expectations. Some people who grew up with the prequels are more forgiving, but even they would admit that there are some things that could have been better if a slightly different decision would have been made. The George Lucas who made the prequels in 1999 wasn't the George Lucas who made the original trilogy. In 1977, he was just getting started with American Graffiti and THX 1138. By 1999, he was George Lucas, and no amount of Howard the Duck was going to change that. This led to some choices that were never challenged. One of the most universally accepted mistakes of the prequels was explaining the Force as the product of microorganisms called midi-chlorians. You know, regardless of what he thought of the movie, Alec Guinness gave a great description of the Force in A New Hope as an energy that
surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
The Force was a properly mystical element that gave Star Wars a sense of magic. People who were sensitive to the Force felt that sensitivity, could reach out to the Force, and with training, could manipulate it, and that was all we really needed to know about the Force. It was touches like these, in fact, that made the original trilogy so magical. It's only after countless viewings do we begin to notice the whiff of the world building in the original series. An offhanded line to Luke from Ben Kenobi about his father during the Clone Wars brings a history to life. No one in that world would explain the Clone Wars to each other. We understood its importance from the intensity of Luke's reaction. Without the quasi-scientific explanation of the Force, it was an old sorcerer's tradition or spooky religion that, even though the Jedi were only wiped out less than 20 years prior, made sense for admirals and scoundrels to doubt it. The second that Qui-Gon Jinn measures Force sensitivity as the collective work of semi-sentient microorganisms, we were taken out of the magic, and now interrogating something we hadn't questioned before. The next one also comes from The Phantom Menace, and it's a big one, but may have slipped under a lot of people's radar as they focus on things like Jar Jar Binks and Anakin's hatred of sand. When we meet young Anakin, he is the child of a slave woman on the desert planet of Tatooine. He's dedicated to his mom and really wants to help out. His big plan is to use his inherent talent for piloting craft to win the local pod races and buy his mother's freedom. Is it a little convoluted? Sure, but it's a galaxy far, far away that is already played by some odd set of rules. The other way that young Anakin wants to help out is by building his mom a droid to help things. That droid is C-3PO. While this taps into another of the sins of both the prequels and the modern Star Wars movies of filling in blanks that didn't need to be filled in,
Solo.
there is a way to have made this one work. There was nothing about C-3PO that suggested we needed a backstory. And if I may, C-3PO can be cited as a defense of Jar Jar Binks. The posh protocol droid that had a knack for complaining in many ways filled the same role as Jar Jar in the original series, as a comic relief fish out of water that made sure we were never taking the situations too seriously. Charmingly voiced by Anthony Daniels, C-3PO was the diffuser during moments of Leia's commitment to the rebellion or Luke's exploration of the Force. The only real sin of Jar Jar is that he was played too broadly to fit in with the sometimes too self-serious politics of the prequels, which is to say the dials just had to be moved slightly inward in both directions. But back to Anakin and the building of C-3PO. We may not need to know the mechanics of the Force or how Han Solo got his last name, but when it comes to android building, there was an opportunity for a little backstory to bring new depth to the original material. You ready for this? Anakin was building the wrong droid. There wasn't a reason for Anakin to have built C-3PO. There was no real mystery or implied history for the uptight protocol droid. Certainly, his slave mother didn't need a shuffling translator that did formal introductions for formal affairs that didn't have a full range of motion in his arms. How's that gonna help, Anakin? However, for the kid who thought he might be able to earn his mother's freedom through pod racing, there was every reason in the world for Anakin to build R2-D2. Anakin would need a special kind of astro droid to help him pilot and maintain his craft, especially if the Force was enhancing his abilities. A regular astromech programmed to respond to the needs of non-Force sensitive pilots might not react quick enough, or would find itself compensating for pilot inputs in the way a traction control system might hinder a seasoned and talented race car driver. Beyond that, the astromech could be part of the special build of Anakin's pod racer, in the way a custom programmed brain is on a home-built racer. And unlike C-3PO, there is an implied mystery to the little rolling beatbox. In both the original trilogy and the prequels, R2 is frequently singled out as an odd and precocious droid, with an unusual level of personality for an astromech. Well, outside Chopper from Rebels, who won't get in a Y-wing after a crash, but that comes much later. R2-D2 is a particularly driven droid that often takes it upon itself to solve problems or move things forward when the flesh and blood characters are too reluctant. But here's where the added weight comes in, and having Anakin make R2-D2 would have made all the difference in the world. We went into the prequels knowing that Anakin Skywalker was going to break bad. There wasn't going to be a triumph at the end. Anakin was going to become Vader and the Empire was going to crush the Republic. So as we watch Anakin question the path he's going to take, facing confusion, frustration, and anger, in a perhaps final moment of clarity, he leans down to his special astromech droid, his own creation, the one thing that he has been able to rely on unquestionably throughout all his ordeals. And he tells it, "I don't know what the future holds, and I'm afraid. I may not be in the place I need to be, so no matter what happens, I want you to look after my family, R2." From that point on, as Anakin descends into the dark side, his trusty droid takes the task it's been given with dedicated seriousness. On Alderaan, it stays by young Leia's side, and when Leia is in trouble, the astromech is willing to cross battle zones and drag across dangerous deserts to find his builder's mentor, and put that mentor together with Anakin's son to help save Anakin's daughter. Imagine now the pathos of that dedicated droid with his given task, as the blast doors close for the night on Hoth, and R2 gives out his plaintive whistle. We already have Alec Guinness's smirk as he says he can't remember owning any droids, knowing he probably recognized R2. But if he was coyly recognizing his Padawan's creation, knowing that it would move heaven and earth for Luke because of Anakin's final instructions, it would carry that much more weight.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
There are a few minor tweaks here and there that would clean up the movies. Things like Yoda knowing Chewbacca during the Clone Wars, a connection no one was asking for. It was fun to see the Wookiees in battle, especially if you spent your high school years exchanging stories you had heard that originally Return of the Jedi was meant to feature Wookiees in the place of Ewoks. I mean, who did that, right? That would be crazy. I'm a nerd. If you ask any Star Wars fan what their favorite movie is, it's likely to be Empire Strikes Back with its screenplay by Lawrence Kasdan. The significance here is that when he wasn't scribing for an overworked George Lucas, Kasdan wrote the script for Body Heat, where he made us buy a romance between William Hurt and Kathleen Turner, or The Bodyguard, where the audience fell for Whitney Houston falling for Kevin Costner. At least a call to his old friend might have avoided a romance based on a hatred of sand and the murder of an entire tribe of indigenous people? Yeah, Kasdan should have been involved. The final piece in the puzzle is in Anakin's transition into Darth Vader. I think we all know where I'm going here. However, if you take out that exclamation, keeping almost everything else the same, the swelling music, the crushing objects as his force powers lose control, and then it all stops, a moment of almost uncomfortable silence before the intake of air on his respirator. Anakin has died, and the cold heart of Darth Vader is born. All things considered, the little bit of melodrama that suggests that Padme died in childbirth because she gave up on life is not a deal breaker for the movie, and melodrama works in the Star Wars universe. But it doesn't really add anything and suggests that she couldn't at least manage enough love in her heart for her twin newborns. It would have been fine to give her a nice, mundane reason to die in childbirth, and for R2-D2 to redouble itself to its task. With just a few tweaks, the prequels could have not only improved themselves, but bettered their connection to the original series. What are your tweaks? Can you still not get past Jar Jar? Less complicated political intrigue and more Darth Maul? No origin story for Boba Fett? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, be sure to subscribe to CBR for the latest videos in your inbox. Thanks for watching!